Welcome to Techie Vida with Dr. J, where life and technology intersect. Welcome everyone to Techie Vida. I am Dr. J, and today we're going to be going deep into some of the biggest shifts that are happening right now. Really talk about humanoids, their connections to AI chatbots, AI agents, AI helper tools in education, and TikTok and much more. I will start today, and I want to make sure that all of you out there at home that are just sitting and listening, that you're going to unpack this with me. But I want to start off with humanoids and the rise of what I think is the embodied AI, right? I was watching a movie with my daughter, and that's why I wanted to have a conversation, because I watched a movie and then I was reading an article from Wired tied to humanoids. And the movie that I watched with my daughter is Chappie, which is pretty much a robotic, or a robot in this case, that's really intelligent. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's really interesting to see how they use this robot. It really has to, from the basic concepts of artificial intelligence, it really has to learn. So they use a lot of brain ingestion to get them to learn or understand a lot of the concepts. Now, one thing that I found interesting is that my daughter was asking me, will that ever happen? And I told her it's already happening at a certain scale, not all the way, but there's a lot out there today. We drive around, we see some cars out there that currently don't need folks to be driving them. So it is something that's evolving. I talked about it previously in my other episode or last season. And for me, it was really thinking about Terminator or RoboCop, which are big movies for me. But my daughter, she really liked Chappie, and the way that she was engaging me on that front really made me think about what's going on, what is the evolution of AI, and where is it going to be heading. I've always been curious because right now AI in of itself, or what's going on in that landscape, is evolving, is changing, and it is getting smarter and better. And that's something that I really wanted to take some time to reflect and talk about. When you often think about a robot and how far it could go. When I was a kid, we saw the movies, we thought about the potential, but ultimately most of them we were, for me, having a toy that was quote unquote robotic, we could control it with a control or something of that scale. Now we're really seeing the evolution of this intelligence or this technology and how it differs from another subject that I wanted to talk about, which is AI agents or chatbots. Often we question or confuse both, but to me, they're pretty much the same. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But they differ. So humanoids do differ from a chatbot in a nutshell, and I'll talk about the why. A humanoid is like, a robot that walks up to you. They could smile and they could do several things. And we're seeing a lot of these companies that are currently, working on that element or that evolution, whether it's Boston Dynamics, Atlas, Tesla, and other robotics that are really currently working on that market, including OpenAI, which stopped their humanoid or their robotics element, but they're picking it back up. And it'd be interesting to see how this evolves and how it, keeps getting better and better. It's a little bit not creepy, but I'm really interested to see where this goes. Now, why did I start with humanoids? Obviously, because my daughter asked me about it, and I do think that that is where we're heading. And along the way, this whole episode today is going to come together, hopefully, really well, because I am going to talk about, this part of it, the humanoids or the robotics element of AI, and where it's going, just because I see more and more of that come out. Now, when you think about all of this, there's a lot of evolution, there's a lot of change. And one thing that I also think about is the risk that comes with any technology, right? Which is we begin to depend a lot on machines or technology and assign them more, which is pretty much the in between, the balance of anything and everything. And I am a big proponent of innovation and technology. But again, the opportunity, it really is something that I'm curious where it's going to go, because it could really help folks, whether it's the elderly person in a nursing home, a student with severe anxiety or struggles that needs help, even a tutor, right? A humanoid powered AI could really step into that gap. I don't think it'll replace human care, let me take a step back and not talk about that, but I think it will be an extension of it overall. Now, I mentioned chatbots, and why did I bring in chatbots with humanoids? Well, chatbots is currently, or AI chatbots, AI agents are currently something that I am intrigued about. Recently, my team and we deployed a few AI agents out there, and they've been really successful. And it's, several success stories tied to this. And it's not that complicated, right? Often we look at these AI solutions to help us with, if it's in higher ed or in education, identifying student, staff, or faculty needs. And you often think about what that is, whether it's financial aid, you know, deadlines, admissions, housing, you name it, and really getting the information readily available to these folks 24/7, or these students, because students, they work all times. And a lot of us, we operate either from a 9 to 5 schedule, but really I see AI chatbots as something that's accessible 24/7. And it's really something for me that I think is going to help all over, right? Because it allows you, or gives you access to other languages. It gives students the ability to interact with it in ways that they understand how to engage and talk. And that's something that I've been really thinking a lot about. And I read this great story within Inside Higher Ed, and I was thinking about chatbots and robotics. And, this story talked about how AI, or these tools, which are basic in of itself, provide the resources that the student needs. And it helps the students, it stops the students from having to navigate, wait in line, be on call. Not to say that all of that is going to go away, but it really helps the students get that information if you have it accessible, and if it's clean and ready, clear. So clarity is a big one when you're really getting these AI agents ready, and really the data that it's ingestion, right? You have to make sure that it's good data, because bad data is always going to result in a bad response. So again, these agents have been more and more coming up. They've been evolving. Before, it was this knowledge base, this human controlled texts or articles that would really drive how students would consume or read the information. And we all know students interpret information differently. On top of that, students are busy. They are overwhelmed. They're juggling a lot of different priorities. So when you think about an agent, or an AI agent, an AI chatbot, you have to really think about the student, the faculty, or the staff, and the other side, and how it's going to benefit them. And when I think about the students, is really getting them information tied to financial aid, whether it's admissions or their graduation efforts on that front. So again, these AI chatbots, agents, they offer 24/7 support. And again, I talked a lot about this previously. They offer instant answers. And the most important part of it, it really frees up staff to handle, or folks to handle, deeper, more complex, human-centered conversations. And to me, that's a sweet spot of AI and how it complements what's going on out there. I will say, we really need to continue to evolve and learn and grow with what's going on in technology, but not necessarily, and I use the term make it an enemy, which is, that's probably the wrong term to use, but a lot of AI tools that I've deployed, they've been really successful in a lot of solutions. And I keep hearing and reading and seeing folks talk about how AI can really affect a students' learning abilities, or it's going to help them cheat. It's always something negative. And for me, it's like AI is a helper. And I've stressed this so many times, and really reframe or move away from this fear of leveraging the tool. Not to mention, I just talked about robotics. If a lot of folks get stuck with, oh, these tools are going to help students cheat, whether it's a homework helper or something of that scale, which we can't control because it's accessible already, then how do we evolve and either stay with it or ahead of all this evolution, all this innovation? Because we really need to be, ahead of it or on top of it, especially as educators. I really want to speak to all the folks out there in the education sector that are afraid of AI tools and how this could affect them. And I will share firsthand that when I was in a classroom teaching, I would always make sure that what I brought to the students, it was something that was going to help them out in the future, not necessarily, make them be afraid of it or punish them for it. So again, students, they're not waiting for permission. They're already using it. The question is not if we allow it, but how do we guide them to it? So I really challenge, and I've been challenging folks to think about this and think about how different it is. I talked about how I saw this in my previous episode when the calculators came about and folks really panicked that we were not going to know math or do math. And the reality is there's a lot of needs, a lot of, professional items that are happening today that they keep changing and evolving. And the reality is it does help. It helps with freeing up time. In the example of the calculator, it shifted from, that manual calculation to deeper conceptual problem solving. Again, not to say that it replaces something, but AI to me is a calculator of ideas or for ideas. And that is something that I do want to stress a lot and talk a lot about because I keep having a hard time with how folks currently see this as something that's gonna, where we need to like stop and or control our students from learning. Now, the next segment, I really want to shift into the element of TikTok. And again, I briefly covered higher education, robotics, covered AI and chatbots, which I think are really critical in today's landscape. But I also want to throw in there and sprinkle in there what's going on with these different tools like TikTok, which is huge, and what's going on out there with the purchase, the risks of control. And I, really want to spend some time there because there is currently an engagement going on between the US and Chinese government about the purchase or the acquisition of TikTok in the US. And the reality, to me, it's as we saw, these apps are not just social media. They are really, for me, beyond social media. They are in of itself a global town square. They've shaped trends, politics, and even the way students learn and think. And for me, it's something that I am monitoring and tracking because these technologies will affect and impact how we think and what we think as individuals. You know, this overall, I've been asking, I haven't read as much into this acquisition, but every time I think about it, I'm like, you know what? It feels quiet, it feels controlled, and there's a lack of transparency to me that's risky because we know platforms of this scale, when they change hands, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the culture. Who decides what content rises and what content disappears? What voices are amplified or silenced? And, we're seeing that a lot right now. We're seeing that a lot with silencing of voices, whether it's with Jimmy Kimmel and all these different folks that are going on. And by the way, huge fan of Jimmy Kimmel, Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert. And I feel like, that element is now being attacked, that freedom of speech, that silencing of voices. And we're in this stage of our life or our history that I never thought we'd get into. So I've been really thinking a lot about what's going on with these acquisitions, with whether it's, from the public or private sector, and how they are really going to affect us. I often take a step back and think about, you know, are we falling in people use the term falling in line with everything that's happening, or do we really think about what's happening and, really work on shaping the future with intention and some level of dignity at its core? Because, I do think a lot about what we're leaving behind and, what our kids are going to really inherit. So there's a lot to unpack with this particular, acquisition or sale of TikTok. And by all means, there's a lot going on in the world. Like, we could bring up Apple, and, there was an article tied to Apple phones being sold in Russia. And I often think about, yes, we're in a global economy, but there's a lot of harm going on out there in the world today. And for me, it's, how do we, for lack of, really get to a place of peace, where we all deserve to live, and, we all deserve to, create a better place than the one that we inherited overall. So again, with all of this, I do have a challenge for y'all for today. My challenge for you is to think about where in your own life you're resisting any level of technology. It could, for me, it's really thinking about AI, and ask yourself, is this resistance protecting me or holding me back? And I ask this because, I really have exposed my daughter and my family, my wife, to a lot of innovation. And we talk about this a lot, and we try to balance it out overall. But I do want to end this episode with a big thank you. I really appreciate you all for spending this time with me on Tequi Vida with Dr. J. If today's conversations sparked any ideas, please reach out. I will be sharing or posting some information for y'all to reach out. But until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep living at the intersection of life and technology. Thanks, everyone.